well, again, but that's the point. What does he mean by process or the event? Because he explicitly says, he emphasizes this all the time, that an event is something momentary, evanescent. And that then the point is fidelity, traces, and so on. You know what I mean? Like, of course there is a process, but my point is precisely how does, this sounds for me too Hegelian to be his position, the idea that, how should I put it speculatively, the event is nothing but its own process, no? No, he has a gap there. He always emphasizes that event is like a momentary flash, and then you have the problem of fidelity. I don't think he would have accepted. No. Again, let me be very clear. I'm here on his side. I share the same problems in a properly Hegelian way. I think that precisely these oscillations are very productive. I think a theory gets interesting precisely when you are forced to be inconsistent, and you look. I mean, theories which just function smoothly are simply not interesting. The same is when we were talking about it, for example, in cognitivism. I like intelligent cognitivists who admit, there is a deadlock, a problem here, something happens, and then this is on what I focus in the middle chapter of part of that obscenity parallax view, on how all of them had to admit that in order from all this brain neuronal retroaction to get to consciousness, a kind of a magic short circuit should happen, when it appears as if the result, effect, causes its own cause. And it's interesting how totally different authors, they all have recourse to the same metaphor. I think that's where Freud or Hegel should enter. And again, I like, there are intelligent cognitivists who admit this deadlock, because maybe you know the debate between so-called reductionists and the great idealist guy is David Chalmers. The great, who simply thinks that he has a point, but I don't take his point. His position is, to put it very simply, that there is a way, of course, all conscious activities, even the most complex ones, of course you can somehow reduce them to neuronal processes and so on, but his point is very nice. He says the problem is not complexity. He rejects, and I totally agree with him here, the idea that we can have a stupid automatic mechanism as long as the tasks are relatively simple, that you need consciousness with a certain amount of complexity. I don't think this. I think first, if anything, consciousness, as every neurobiologist will tell you, consciousness is an operator of simplification. Consciousness simplifies. And I think if there is my dogma is twin here, and I don't know if they were just flattering me, but when I had a debate, private debate, not big public, with some neurologists, I will be very modest, I don't want to boast too much. They pretend that, I don't know what they were talking after I left. Maybe, that jerk, good that we got rid of him, but at least face to face they pretend that they were interested, that there is something in it, namely in what? I said that my two basic dogmas are that it's not complexity, it's quite the opposite, the simplification. This is what Badiou meant, probably he explained it also to you during his classes, this crucial point, what he calls of le point, the point. You have a complex situation, then at a certain point you should say a decision, yes or no, this brutal reduction. And also, for example, when you have a complex situation, the true work of intelligence is not this, here, me and Badiou, that's our private joke, like to make fun of, unfair a little bit, of Derrida. He says that Derrida's basic dogma is always, but the situation is a little bit more complex, like, it's not like this, it's more, no, of course it's complex, but this is common sense stupidity, how should I put it, no? The act of consciousness is precisely when you have a complex phenomenon. And of course, in real life, everything is complex. To isolate one feature, to say, but it's really about this. So that again, consciousness is an operator of simplification. All that complexity, your unconscious, not even in the Freudian sense, in the simple sense of, what goes... Sorry?
Non-conscious.
Non-conscious, yes, can do. And second thing, and that's what did interest some brain scientists I spoke with, is my idea is that, I based it on a very simple analogy, that consciousness is at its zero level, it must have emerged as a consciousness of a failure. In a simple sense, you are, for example, writing. You write it automatically. It's totally ingrained into your neuronal reflexes. You don't think about it. When do you become aware of it as such? When something doesn't function. At that point, oh my God, you notice things when they don't function. And my idea was simply to generalize this radically. What if consciousness as such is originally linked to some ultimate failure? Maybe Heideggerians would have said death or some failure, non-functioning and so on. So that again, I want to... because you know why? This is, I think, the only way to avoid one of the good arguments of those of Chalmers and those guys, who have a very good argument against these people who try to prove that consciousness can be reduced to neural processes. What they prove is, let's say, they take a very complex activity, and then they prove it that you can account for this activity at the purely material level of neuronal interaction, whatever, that you can reduce it. But then a question remains. If you can reduce it, why then consciousness at all? You know what I mean? The better you explain complex activities through neuronal mechanism, the more the enigma remains. Why do you need to be aware of it? Why doesn't it simply function as a kind of a complex computer? What is the function of awareness? And I don't think that they usually then, even with Dennett, whom I otherwise appreciate, I don't agree here, he tends to play the card of complexity. Like, when things get complex at a certain level, you simply need some kind of a central agency who introduces order, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that works. Here, again, I have a limited sympathy with, how is the guy called? With Chalmers, who says that, his big argument that the problem is not complexity. The problem is this, how do they call it? The hard problem, raw fact of awareness. Why awareness? In what sense does it help our survival, adaptation to be aware of something? Why cannot it's easy to say. Let me take an example. You can say, my God, I walk around, I become aware of my God, I will be evil towards you. It's my nature. Sorry, don't take it personally. I like that Scorpio, who bites the frog in the middle of the stream, even if he will die for it. Let's say I walk on Sasfe, I see one of you. My reaction is, let's take a tour so that you don't ask me some stupid questions. Sorry, it's my nature. What I want to say is that, now we will say clearly, my awareness functions as a survival mechanism and so on, how it helps me survive. But then I can say, but still, it's not clear, why should I be aware of it? Why can't we do it as a simple blind mechanism which perceives the danger and gives the signal, you know what I mean? The raw fact of awareness is an enigma. But I don't agree again with Chalmers' conclusion, where, as you probably know, his idea is simply that to the fore, I think this is the weak, strong atomic force, gravity, whatever, magnetic force, that the only solution is to a kind of it's ironic how, as a big idealist, he ends up in a way in a strange mixture of idealism with the most vulgar materialism. He says that the only way is to grasp awareness as simply another fundamental natural force. It's literally, quintessence. You know what quintessence means? The fifth essence. So that on the top of, the four ones, the weak, strong, atomic force and what? Magnetic and what's the other shit? Gravity or what? No? That to this four we should simply add another fundamental force. But I think this is precisely the false issue. He simply, I mean...
Do you mean the standard theory in physics?
Yeah.
Forces?
Four. There are four.
Yeah.
And now we all know the story. I mean, superficially. The big problem is how to unite them and all that and so on. And here interesting things happen. You know this oscillation about string theory. First it was winning, then it was losing. Then some 10 years ago it was winning, but now this is the stock market tendency in quantum physics. Now it's losing again. And it's very interesting what's the latest tendency, I was told. You know, there is a wonderful term called, how shall I call it, Ptolemization. You know Ptolemeus. His was geocentric system. And then there were new and new data which didn't fit it. So, to maintain his model, he had to introduce more and more complex supplementary hypotheses. So the idea is that, yes, we have a problem, but that string theory is not too radical, but not radical enough. It's still a Ptolemization, it's not yet Copernicus. Ptolemization, which is why they need all this shit, 10 dimensions, and the tragedy is that it's not only that we cannot measure them, they even didn't devise a possible experiment of how to measure and so on. So I like this speculation. The idea is that we will have to wait for a much more radical revolution, and the hypothesis is that one or two, either time or space will have to go, probably time. That is to say that one of these very elementary constituents of reality will have to be erased. Now, finally.
To get back to your fundamental theory about a failure that accounts for at least a question of why consciousness.
Yeah.
This reminds me of Julian Jaynes,
Who is this?
Julian Jaynes, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind.
Yeah.
The idea was that
it's a lot
like the research on mirror neurons. This is a kind of fundamental breakdown, and because the brain needs to talk to itself, neurophysiologically even, this is what creates consciousness. It's kind of like a materialism, but not exactly. Do you know that?
No. I only know I know this idea of. Is he the guy who claimed that, for example, prior to ancient Greece, people simply were still bicameral, in the sense that they for them simply, for example, what they experience as sacred and so on, consciousness, it was simply another power.
So culture becomes the stitching together of two consciousnesses.
Not spontaneous. You know what's only my problem here? I'm afraid of a temptation here. Temptation in the sense that, these theories are so attractive that we, bluffing philosophers, are easily seduced, and oh my God, then you link this to Hegel. I don't know if you have this expression. If you are too pretentious, we in Slovene, we have this, back to obscenity, we have this expression, you think you are holding God by his balls. So I like the theory. I'm just simply skeptical in the sense of how tested it is scientifically. I know that wonderful things, Catherine Malabou, that Hegelian brain scientist, convinced me that wonderful things are going on now in brain sciences on the top quality, especially about this, we all know, this so-called plasticity of mind, no?
Neuroplasticity.
Not only this vulgar plasticity in the sense of trans-functioning and so on, but all the stuff which makes it very easy and nice for a Hegelian like her to. So if you want a good book on Hegel, again, look at it's published by Princeton University Press. Okay, the title is The Future of Hegel.
What's her name again?
Malabou, Malabou. Catherine Malabou. It's translated in English. What's also very good is that it has a long introduction, which was originally in French, a review of the book, a long introduction by Derrida, which is a wonderful text. You can see that you cannot oppose in this simplistic way Derrida versus Hegel. Hegel, total metaphysics, everything is swallowed by the by the idea Derrida, no, something remains, and so on. Derrida she almost reconverted Derrida to Hegel, because Derrida was, if you read him closely, was all the time much more ambiguous towards Hegel. For example, a standard deconstructionist would tell you the basic mechanism Hegelian of is Aufhebung, sublation. You took something and you elevate it, internalize it through idealization. But then it appears that the basic motive of deconstruction is, but this sublation, the reduction of the otherness through mediation, internalization, never fully functions, there is always a remainder, and so on. So it appears as if the ultimate push topic of Derrida is precisely anti-sublation, anti-Hegel. But no, already somewhere in his early works, I don't know where, forgot, Derrida says that sublation, what Hegel calls Aufhebung, is so close to difference that the line is almost imperceptible sometimes. So again, Derrida always emphasized that, he even says sometimes that maybe Hegel is not the ultimate idealist, but on the contrary, the point where metaphysics comes closest to deconstruction. No. Okay, but listen, we get lost here. Let me do some work. Hegel today, and maybe a little bit tomorrow, and some ethics. Okay, so I want to begin with, again, the basic difference between this kind of organic evolution and what Hegel means by a dialectical process. Organic evolution is, to put it very simply, a self-deployment of a global universal principle. At all levels, at the individual level, you have an organism. Of course, everything changes, your stuff changes, you are in contact, but through all these gradual changes, the organism survives. This, like you have a certain, we cannot say universality, but encompassing entity, the one, how the organic process is how the one survives through the continuous generation, corruption, and so on. Things change all the time so that they remain the same, how should I put it, no? And even if we move from individual level to the higher level of a species, you can say it's the same. It's that individuals die, are born, struggle, but precisely through this very constant dynamic process, the species remains the same, sustains itself. And this is what people usually understand by dialectics. How you don't have, on the one hand, the stability of some universal principle, and then the irrelevant empirical movement, but that an idea is alive precisely when it maintains itself through its dynamic. But for Hegel, this precisely is the limit of nature. Let's put it in this way. In this, okay, now you will say, but also in nature, a species can vanish. Yes, but then it's simple external negation, Hegel would have said. It's not an inherent negation. Like, I reproduce myself, then a stronger animal comes, eats me up, or an asteroid hits me, I die. Okay, but this is, Hegel would have put it, totally external contingency. It can happen, of course, but it's irrelevant. The principle, again, of life is that the universality or the one remains by itself through the other. You interact with the other, and it is this very interaction which sustains you as the one. And of course, then this sounds very dialectical, like, oh my God, you see how it's the very change which allows me to remain the same. The moment I no longer change, I die, I'm not even the same, and so on and so on. But this is not what Hegel is about. Why not? For Hegel, there is something quite different which goes on in what he calls spirit, human history. It is Imagine it like this. If, oh my God, I think this, what is this? Can one? No. Why not? I will do it something dirty like Wolfgang, fuck off, and so on. You will not be able to. I like Wolfgang, but he pretends to be liberal. You know, he always accuses me, you are a proper Stalinist. But then, did you notice how, from time to time, you know, he's from East Germany, no? He denies it now, but the Stalinist, how you call it, discipline, blah, blah. How, then, all of a sudden, when you talk, all of a sudden, you get a trace of this harshness. Like yesterday, did you notice how, when we were talking about Adorno, Habermas, and he said, yes, Habermas is ein Verräter. This is very hard to say. This is this brutal, a traitor, you know, like all this gentle Wolfgang, you know, or this Lassen, Gelassenheit, and then Verräter, and so on. No? I love this. Well, I told Wolfgang, he needs more of that. Okay, so again, here we have the one or the same. Life is this, how? And here we have continuous changes. Life is this, how the one maintains himself through the very process of changes. Again, as I told you, at individual level, you have to change to interact precisely to remain the same. And again, people usually think this is dialectics. You see how sameness and unity are connected, the only way to remain the same is to change, blah, blah, blah. With Hegel, something different happens. Let's say we start with one. We have a process. But then, as I developed yesterday, you remember when I said how an idea in its realization undermines itself. We have one, an idea. I want to be this. Then I realize myself, in particular life, and the idea itself dissolves and another element, as it were, takes over. The change is at this level for Hegel. The change, the universal itself, it's not just the medium which remains the same. The changes are at this level. So that people usually say, but it all remains with Hegel within the same totality. The subject externalizes itself, then it swallows back the otherness, and so on. Yes, the idea comes back to itself, but to put it in vulgar terms, it's no longer the same idea. The idea, this disappears, and through the process, another idea comes up, which was previously just a moment here. What do I mean by this? For example, take Marx puts this in wonderfully simple terms. Take the relationship of money and capital. First, money is the encompassing, even at the zero level, what runs the process are simply commodities. Commodity is the master. You produce something that you want to exchange. And money is just a subordinate moment. No? In the sense of, I don't know, I produce something, you produce something. We exchange it, but then it gets too complex. What if you have something that I want and we need a mediator, money, blah, blah. So it's money. Here, at the elementary level, money still appears to be a subordinate moment. Then medium of exchange. Then something happens with capital. It is that money, which was previously a subordinate moment, becomes the subject of the process. It's no longer commodity, money, commodity. It's no longer that, this, again, as Marx put it, in a simple pre-capitalist exchange, the movement is commodity, money, commodity. I sell something in order to buy another thing. With capital, money, which was just the subordinating mediator, becomes the subject. So that it is what encompasses the process, the true subject of the process becomes what was previously just a subordinate moment, was money itself. The same goes for Marx for production. Marx put this in wonderful terms when he says that from the individual standpoint of the producer, you produce to satisfy your needs. But from the global standpoint, needs are generated in order to keep the production running. The true goal of the historical process is not to satisfy your need, but is the development of production itself, and so on and so on. So,
is that Say's law?
Sorry?
Say's law.
Is that?
It's called Say's law in economics.
I know, how do you call it? Is here I'm an idiot.
S-A-Y-S. Well, S-A-Y.
Okay, yeah, but what does it mean? What does it say, this law?
The need generates the production. Or that the production generates the need, yes, Say's law. You produce the goods, a need will arise.
Although I didn't even know that it's called Say's law, because, I mean, it's already, how should I put it, Marx said this already in a different way, and so on, even the early Marx, whom I intensely dislike, the humanist Marx, and so on.
Kind of reverses the usual capitalist formula of find that need, fill that need. You make the goods, who cares? And then eventually the need will just arrive at it.
You can say that. But but let's remind, sorry.
Oh yeah, it sounds like Lewis Mumford's ideas on technological determinism, that the way of doing something becomes the reason for doing something.
But let's not lose a thread now. I agree. But these are all examples, you see how, and this is what Hegel is, how the process is a process of something, a subject. What happens for Hegel in spiritual, properly, dialectics is that it's not only that the same reproduces itself through changes, is that the very encompassing unity, as it were, of a process changes. Something which was previously a subordinated moment becomes the totalizing moment. So what happens in history, it's not that a totality differentiates itself, no, that historical process is rather a constant process of re-totalization. What changes, it's not that you have, let's take state again. You don't have a concept of state which then realizes itself in different forms. What is for Hegel at stake in historical changes is that the very general notion of what a state means changes. The struggle is at the level of universality. Let me give you an example. It's a simple one, but I'm not, let's make something clear with all my evil so that you will not misunderstood me. When I say let's take a simple example, the idiot I'm addressing here, it's me, not you. That is to say, I'm always obsessed precisely because I'm dealing with theorists who are usually considered difficult to read, even for some people bluffing like Lacan, Hegel. I'm obsessed with this idea. If you can't put it clearly, don't bluff about it, and so on. So I think that, again, we are back at what consciousness is, and so on. The great art is not to play this complexity. The great art is, and here, this is Hegel's strength often, to provide a simple formula or image, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, you say, now I see it. Which is why I will later come to a joke, which I think it's the ultimate Hegelian joke, probably you know it. But let's go back to it. Let's take, I think I mentioned this in one of my books, let's take the history of philosophy. You cannot say, this is what I mean, and Hegel means with either concrete universality or this change at the very level of universality or historicity proper. When you read an introduction to philosophy, you usually get, it's a very simple point again that I will be making, you usually get some kind of general classification. It can be of philosophical disciplines, or it can be of different orientations. You can say, what would be the usual thing to say? If we have today 3-4 main tendencies in philosophy. We have different modes of analytic philosophy, more traditional philosophy of science, language analysis, or now more cognitivism, brain sciences. We have phenomenology, we have deconstructionism, we have versions of German idealism. So you simply differentiate, but you know where I challenge you? This would be the Hegelian challenge. If you look at it closely, you will see that no such mapping is neutral. Every such mapping presupposes already a certain philosophical standpoint. There is no meta-language. It is clear that, for example, usually such a distinction of philosophy either has an analytical bias where the story is, and they can be very arrogant today, the story is that only with contemporary analytical philosophy, post-classical, not that logical empiricism, but this contemporary cognitivism, philosophy simply became another positive knowledge science. So that the gap is continental philosophy is poetry, it can have interesting metaphoric insights, but a Heideggerian would have put a totally different accent, that analytical philosophy is not a proper philosophy at all. It's basically just some kind of positive description, that the task of philosophy is to think, to reflect on, I simplify it, what Heidegger calls Ereignis, event, or Lichtung, in the sense of opening, clearing, the way the meaning of being is disclosed to us. This kind of a ultra-transcendental reflection of what historically for us today means something really exists, being, and so on. So for him, that's not. So what I'm telling you is that there is no neutral classification. That, how should I put it, each philosophical orientation is not only itself, but it's itself and a certain view on the totality. And the point is that you cannot step on your own shoulder and give a neutral classification. Every classification, the totality of philosophy appears to you differently. If you are an analytical philosopher, if you are a deconstructionist, the big divide will be between, this constant attempt how to overcome metaphysics. Their story is, there is a certain metaphysical closure, and then the measure is how much did you break through to some other sphere, which is why, and here, but you once wonderfully annoyed Wolfgang, where Wolfgang was attacking in one debate years ago, these stupid evening talks, me and Alain as being too dualistic, you still think in old metaphysical category, this, that, dualistic, but he says, no, today we live in a different era, we are entering different domain, post-metaphysical, blah, blah. And then, of course, but you, in a very nasty way, said, so your dualism is dualism and non-dualism. It's a self-referential dualism, which is even a stronger one, no? Also, I remember, this was a nice story. Oh, it was so evil. She was so mad, although I'm friendly with her. Avital Ronell gave a talk. Maybe some of you were there 4 years ago, I think, where on Wagner and Nietzsche. And her point was that the greatness of Nietzsche was to find the strength to betray Wagner, his master teacher. And then she went into all this poetry of how the creative moment of thinking is the betrayal of the master. No? And then, with one bitchy remark, but you ruined the show. He just asked her, okay, where is your betrayal of Derrida? And then it was incredible how this simple remark, there was also the other, how is he called, another deconstructionist follower of Derrida, I forgot his name, the German guy, who was there, and Avital's answer was to immediate resort to what but you would have called paraconsistent logic. Yes, it's not really always, there are exceptions. Then some, how is it called? Something, the deconstructionists did a very desperate move. He said, Derrida doesn't need this because he is so creative that he is all the time already betraying himself, and so on. No, it was quite funny to note how they Okay, that's a nice Hegelian moment, but let me go on. So, philosophy back. You see, at the very simple point, the wager of Hegel's notion of historicity or concrete universality, it's not that there is no universality. There is universality, but that the life is in universality itself. We are at the level of, and this is history. History is history of universalities. History means precisely there is no meta-language. In the sense of there is no, you cannot step out of you on your shoulder and see globally how things are. Every all-encompassing view on history is already part of history. For example, even in politics, you remember, if you are not too young, that, now I'm big, but it's unfortunate true that you remember that once upon a time in politics there was something called left and right. Maybe you remember those old times. You know what? Here you have this, what I'm talking about at its purest. Left and right. Yes, but you cannot give, I challenge you to give a neutral description of the social political space where you will say what is left, what is right. If you look closely, you will see that every description of what is left and what is right is already either leftist or rightist description. Because left and right are not just two political positions within a political space. The totality of the space appears to you differently if you are a right-winger or a left-winger. To put it in very simplistic terms, not always, but fundamentally, the basic rightist motive is that of organic stability. First, a true right-winger doesn't say, I'm a right-winger. They like to distinguish the organic center and the extremes. For them, it would be this organic, stable center and the extreme excesses. For the left-winger, it's the opposite. It's that the fundamental fact is struggle as such. So, you see my point. This is what Hegel means by historicity proper. Again, it's not only that a universal idea then articulates itself, that, for example, philosophy subdivides into this, that philosophy, and so on. Each particularity, as it were, has its own universality. The only way to define what is philosophy is to go through all forms of philosophy. Not because of a simple evolutionism that philosophy develops, but again, because there is no neutral universal notion of philosophy. You know, the movement is at the level of universality itself. That would have been, to put it in very simple point. And which is why, in politics, for Hegel, the historical moment proper occurs in the moments when a certain historical form is threatened, and then a new form arises. And Hegel is very clearly here. This is the role of so-called great historical personalities, heroes who are at the same time criminals in the sense of outside the law. And the way Hegel is usually read is that, yes, you as a hero follow your arrogant instincts, like, of course, Caesar wanted power. But you are following the line of what Hegel calls cunning of reason. You are an unconscious tool of a historical reason. You think you are following your narrow motives, egotism and so on, but in reality you are just an instrument of the higher rationality, reasoning, history, and so on and so on. I don't think it works as such. It works like this in Hegel. I think we should here take into account what I already said, and rather see the process as much more open. When a certain historical forum is falling apart, there is a moment of genuine contingency. And then the hero does something, and if he is lucky, you have here following what in his wonderful text, you should read him, he's not an idiot, the guy who died, the British philosopher Bernard Williams. you know, what he calls moral luck. This is a deeply Hegelian idea. The idea that even in morality, you cannot in advance measure the ethical status of an act by the purity of intention, whatever, that it depends on the very ethical status of an act, depends on how it turns, and so on and so on. So again, Hegel's idea is rather that something which is a contingency may, through a repetition, then establish itself as necessity. The example here would have been precisely Caesar. You know, Hegel uses this nice paradox that Caesar is at the same time the name of an individual, and then it became a title. That's for Hegel the function of repetition. First you do it, you fail, but you return as universality. In order for a thing to assert itself as necessity, it has to repeat itself. Again, first you have a person, Caesar, then it's repeated as a title. And in a wonderfully funny way, Hegel goes through history giving other examples of how Napoleon also had to lose twice. First in 1813, then in 1850. No? So that his loss was a necessity. So now let's go on. What does Hegel means by this retrospective character of the meaning of our acts? That's, again, now I will do a little bit of Antigone, because that's Hegel's basic insight, that Hegel is not an intentionalist. His position is extremely interesting here, very modern if you want. Hegel's point is not you do something that, you know, all this game of intentions, you intend to do something that, for Hegel, the meaning of an act arises only through the act itself. For Hegel, the rule is rather that you intend to do something, and it's only through the meaning, through the act itself, that you discover retroactively what you really meant to do. Meaning is not pre-existing. Hegel is not here, in this sense, an internalist. Hegel is totally opposed to this false hermeneutic idea of what do I know, what did you mean with that? I would have to know your mind to know what did you mean it. No, for Hegel, you yourself don't know what you meant. You wanted something, but it's through the act that it becomes retroactively clear to you what you meant. And again, in a radical reading of Hegel, I claim this doesn't mean that somebody else does know. That you know, that you are just a tool. You think you are doing A, but some divine intelligence, reasoning history controls it. No, it's contingency. Reason of history, it's history is, as Hegel would, as Gould, Stephen Jay Gould, the Marxist Darwinian, would have put it, one big process of acceptation. Hegel, I think, is the arch theories of acceptation. You do something meant for a certain goal, it's accepted, but in an improvised, open way. I will try to prove this to you now by taking the big example from phenomenology, Antigone. It is so elementary that I didn't want you to give you the literature, but if you want, tomorrow I can give you some parts of Hegel which are worth reading. I prefer this arrogant way. Not you read Hegel, then you interpret me. I tell you what to look in Hegel, then you read Hegel. Sorry, yeah. Okay, so for Hegel, what is crucial, as you maybe know, is the passage from tragedy to comedy. Comedy is for Hegel the truth of tragedy. He doesn't mean the usual thing that tragedy is not here. The way Hegel is interpreted here is again in a false pseudo-dialectical way. People usually think like this. Once you are caught into the action, you participate, it's tragic, it's the real struggle. But then, from the position of the universal idea, you see how all these struggles are just moments in a global unity, so this is wisdom. How, we fight our struggles, but you know, all these ridiculously stupid proverbs like, Aren't we only elements in some higher theater piece written by God? We don't even know what, and so on and so on. I hate proverbs. I think proverbs are the stupidity of language embodied. What are proverbs? Whatever you do, you always find a proverb to justify it, I claim. Let's say I'm doing something which is a little bit risky. I succeed. What will be your reaction if you are stupid? I'm not saying you are. Probably will tell something like, I don't know, in Slovenia we have proverbs like only those who risk profit or whatever, like proverbs justifying the necessity of taking a risk. Let us say that I fail. Oh, you will have a gain. I don't know, we in Balkan, it is in Slovenia, we have a nice proverb, this skeptical. It says something like, you cannot urinate against the wind, you know. Yeah. And incidentally, if you talk about slips of tongue which produce obscene effects, this is my favorite ultimate obscenity. Once I made this point in Paris at a seminar by Jacques-Alain Miller, and I wanted to make this point again, and I wanted to translate, of course it was in French, into French, this. You cannot urinate against the wind. I confused the French words, and I confused shit. Instead of on ne peut pisser, I said on ne peut chier. You cannot cheat contre le vent. And Miller was scared. He just looked coldly at me and said, the wind must be really strong in your I know, these were nice moments of my experience there. Okay, but let's go on. So, it's not this position of wisdom that Hegel means by the passage from tragedy to comedy. He means something else. What he wants to illustrate, apropos Antigone, is again precisely this retrospectivity of the true meaning of our acts. You do something, retrospectively you discover, but for Hegel this discovery is constitutive. You get my point. It's not that some higher intelligence knew from the very beginning. No, there is no reasoning history in this sense. Reason is always retroactive. You can tell a story, but only afterwards. Okay, what's Hegel's point of Antigone? Antigone, for Hegel, deploys what happens when a subject acts upon the premises of some, what Hegel calls ethics of immediate substantial custom. The idea is that, you know how Antigone acts confronting Creon. It's not a reflective acting. It's not the idea. Her point is not to argue in this typical modern way, conflicting ethical claims. He simply does it because it's in her nature to do it. He's referring as a fact to something, some unwritten laws compel her to do it what she's doing. And for Hegel, this immediate reliance on this ethical substance. You know, Antigone is not thinking strategically, like in certain situation you act like this, like that. It's this kind of ethical, substantial immediacy. Here is this beautiful quote. Zeus did not announce those laws which justify her resistance to Creon. Zeus did not announce those laws to me, and justice, living with the gods below, sent no such laws for men. I did not think anything which you proclaimed strong enough to let a mortal override the gods and their unwritten and unchanging laws. They are not just for today or yesterday, but exist forever, and no one knows where they first appeared. So I did not mean to let a fear of any human will lead to my punishment among the gods. So again, her position here is what Hegel calls immediate ethical substance. You rely on your, let's call it very naively, spontaneous ethical instinct. I cannot do it otherwise, that's the substantial justice that is which is an organic part of my being. Hegel is very precise here. He doesn't oppose this to freedom. Now, let's do a little bit of analysis. Hegel is not saying that Antigone is, as it were, dominated by some compulsive mechanism. No, this is already the modern notion. If you experience something as some kind of a blind mechanism which compels you to act in a certain way, it means you already have a minimum of distance to experience it as something externally imposed. Which is why Hegel is totally right to say that this idea of l'homme machine, we humans are just victims dominated by some objective mechanism, this is a typical position of modern freedom. Because, you already, in order to experience something as a compulsion, you already must have a minimal position outside. If you are in the compulsion, it's not a compulsion. Now, this is why Antigone is for Hegel also the figure of love. What is love? Love is, on the one hand, the ultimate freedom. We all know you cannot fall in love on an order. You can be, although, okay, it's more complex. In politics, everything is possible. We do say, you must love your parents, you must love your country, but that's another point. Let's not go into. What I'm saying is that, let's say if you fall in love, that's the paradox of love. On the one hand, it's free in the sense that you shouldn't be, if you are forced by yourself or by an external authority to love somebody, it's no longer love. So love is in this sense free. You feel all your being in authentic, passionate love. But at the same time, it's not free in the sense that you have absolutely no choice. You know what I mean? Like, you cannot say, no, I will not point out so that you will not, you must already probably have a long list to report me to some politically correct committee or what. I don't want to act, but okay, I will look up, okay. That you will not, if I say now I want to fall in love, it's a lady there, let's compare. The moment I approach, it's not love. Love is always, the choice of love is always retroactive. In authentic love, you never know when you fall in love. All of a sudden, retroactively, you discover I am in love. You cannot, the now is never here. And here you have, I'm so sad we don't have time for it, the most subversive, beautiful speculations of the other great German idealist, Schelling, who goes into this how the highest freedom is always unconscious. Namely, contrary to the common sense, which tells us free acts must be conscious, for Schelling, the ultimate freedom is unconscious. In the sense of this fundamental decision, which you, with your conscious ego, like fundamental decision like the choice of a love partner, for example, which is contingent, totally free. Like, love is by definition contingent. You never know in whom love can be totally, you never know in whom you end up falling in love. But the point is that it is necessarily experienced as something not even blindly imposed. It's simply your nature. You cannot do it otherwise. And I like this Schelling's nice totalitarian view. His idea is that even if you have no choice, you are still fully responsible for it. That what you cannot do is to say, he even takes these theological examples. He says, okay, slightly anti-Semitic, I'm sorry, the example. He says, it was forever determined in the very fate of Judas that he will betray Christ. He didn't have a choice. It was his destiny. But nonetheless, he is fully responsible for it. And then he makes a much more appropriate, not such a stupid, anti-Semitic, concrete example, and it's true. When he says that when you encounter a truly evil person, and I did encounter some of them, it's true, you can see that their evil is part of their nature. They simply are like that. But nonetheless, they are responsible. Okay, Schelling's solution of this enigma, which you find already in Kant, is a wonderful one. Is a kind of a transcendental a priori act. It sounds idealist, but it's not. It's very close to what in psychoanalysis we would have called the choice of the fundamental fantasy. That in some kind of atemporal, a priori act, we are, as Sartre would have put it, responsible for our project, for what we are. Of course, in our temporal reality, we experience this as our nature. You cannot change it. But fundamentally, at an unconscious level, we are responsible for it. And this is how also Freud says, when, Freud already answers this boring Foucauldian reproach before Foucault's time, of course, that psychoanalysis is comparable to confession. You have to confess your blah blah. No, Freud says psychoanalysis is much worse. In confession, you are responsible for what you did, for blah blah. For what you know, you should tell everything. In psychoanalysis, you are responsible even for what you don't know and what you didn't do and so on, no? Because, again, it's this, let's call it choice of fundamental fun. But, okay, now let's go further. Here, you can see the difference between what Hegel calls the substantial ethics, this naivety of ethical substance, where you simply act like this because you cannot do it otherwise. And the modern ethics. The modern ethics for Hegel is the paradigm of modern ethics is Immanuel Kant. There, Kant brings to extreme this idea of reflexive character of all ethical norms. In the sense of, for Kant, the laws that you have, moral laws, moral norms, whatever, that you follow, are never simply given to you. You are responsible for them. This is what Kant means by radical freedom and so on. That, how should I put it? When Kant makes you, what does Kant mean by subjective autonomy, which is exactly the opposite of Antigone? He doesn't want to say, oh, you are free to act autonomously. No. What Kant prohibits is, this typical ethical excuse. Let's say I have to hurt you as part of my duty. I have to do something because of my moral duty which will hurt you, and you are my friend. And then the usual hypocritical excuse is, I'm sorry, but I know it will hurt you, but I cannot help it. It's not my choice. It's my duty. No, you cannot say this for Kant. For Kant, you are not only responsible to do your duty, you are also responsible to define what your duty is. You should stand behind it. There is, again, this is typical modernity, there is no substantial other which guarantees, as it were, to you that this is your duty. That's modern freedom. It's kind of a more reflexive freedom. It's not only freedom, you can follow your duty or not. It's freedom in the sense of responsibility, or, so to put it in another way, people usually usually say there is no excuse for not doing your duty. You have to do it. Kant is adding another twist to it. His point is, there is also no excuse for doing your duty. In the sense of, you cannot say, sorry, that's my duty. No, you have to stand fully behind it. This is why, going back to the start, sorry?
I'll give you a good example.
Yes.
Yesterday, the Scottish Justice Minister.
Yeah. Yesterday also, yeah.
And he said, I'm doing my job. I didn't choose this moment.
Yeah.
I'm doing my
Yeah.
And he stood behind it. He didn't blame anybody.
I like this, that he stood behind it.
I don't agree with him or whatever, but he was...
You know what bothered me? Okay, let's not lose time on this, but I would like to reply to...
Okay, just for example.
You know what interests me? If that, I have no sympathy for terrorists, blah, blah, but something did intrigue me. If you watch TV, did you notice that Scottish guy, I think the father of one of the victims, or the son, who said, if that is true, it really puts everything in the new light. That they discovered that there was some break into where the luggage was kept at Heathrow the night before for this flight, and that not only they didn't inquire into this, but that this entire event was suppressed, which is which is with great probability probably where the bomb was. I mean, if this is true, then it's not just Arab terrorists looking for excuses and so on.
That's not the real story. The real story is there's a strong suspicion by not the usual suspects, by mainstream media, that something is being suppressed. That he's really not guilty. More likely Quran than living.
Again, I'm not here too paranoiac. I don't buy those stories. Although, again, I know there are some shady clips. You know those stories of, how do you call it, of the September 11th was all staged by... I don't know enough about it, no? But generally, I tend to be more skeptical. You know why? Because my position is that ultimately, I don't think it matters. What matters is how it was used ideologically. I have to put it, I think that paranoiac theories tend to overdo that. What they don't get is that the point they are trying to make can be made also without this paranoiac surplus, as they put it, no? But okay, let's go back to Kant. So, you know this story, here I respectfully disagree with Hannah Arendt. This story that Kant is the philosopher of unconditional duty, whatever you should do your duty, and that in this sense Eichmann was genuinely a Kantian. Because you know that Eichmann's defense was a Kantian one. He explicitly referred to Kant. He said, I just did what I perceived as my duty. My duty was to follow the orders for my country, and Führer's law command was for me my duty, so I was just a Kantian. I think it's totally wrong. Because what Kant prohibits you is precisely this way of erasing, it's not me, I was just following orders. No, you have to stand behind. You cannot turn yourself just into an instrument. That's what Kant's autonomy is. It's a much more radical position than it may appear. And incidentally, don't dismiss Kant as too easy. Kant is an extremely interesting philosopher, where things get so complex. There is no Hegel without Kant, because my view of history of philosophy is a very simple one. You will laugh. True philosophy is something which started with Kant and ended with Hegel. Before, they were doing some confused intuitions. After, they tried to overturn, but nobody even understood Hegel, and so on and so on. Everything happened there. So, what is so interesting in Kant, here is the same as with Hegel. Let's do a short, we are back to Hegel, I didn't lose my track, Hegelian critique of Kant. Kant often makes a philosophical choice. And then, as Badiou would have put it, he behaves paraconsistently, no? He wants to withdraw. He's afraid of the consequence. Which is why today we should repeat Kant. And I think what Lacan did is to repeat Kant in this sense. Lacanian ethics of psychoanalysis in a way is very Kantian. What do I mean by this? Let me give you a couple of examples which will interest you. First, minor examples, which are funny but crucial. You know how Kant often says something and then is afraid of the consequences and withdraws. For example, Kant asks the question at some point in his metaphysics of morals, rather of customs, Sitten, are there situations where you are allowed to kill another human being with impunity? Then he enumerates two such possibilities. One is the relatively obvious one in his life, the duel of honor. Apart from war, which is collective killing, of course. The duel. If you have a duel, I challenge you, you kill me, it's okay. It may be not legal, but it's somehow ethically acceptable for me to kill you, maybe. Then he does an example which is terrifying. To kill an illegitimate child. And he uses the terrifying parallel with smuggled commodity. He said, in the same way that a state has the right to destroy a smuggled commodity because it physically exists, but not legally, it's not covered by the law, in the same way an illegitimate child exists just physically, not legally, and parents have the right to kill it, the mother. And then in a typical Kantian move, in a footnote, he said, of course, this doesn't mean we should really do it, blah, 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 but it's there. Another Kantian madness, and Hegel was shocked by this. You know, in the same book, Metaphysics of Morals, Kant extremely brutally consequent definition of marriage. You must know it, it's wonderful. That it's the contract between the two adults of a mutual use of sex organs for pleasure. None of this, you know, higher unity, blah, blah. And Kant gives a wonderful answer when, okay, let's not go into it. What I want to tell you is that he is consequent here. Because it's not just this one point, because if you look at the page later, this is Kant at his comical best. He asks the question, if a husband runs away from a wife, does the wife have the right to call police to bring the husband back? Kant's answer is yes. Why? Because the husband ran away with a piece of property which, according to the marriage contract, was the property of a wife, the penis. So it's not some spiritual unity, it's just, you know, bringing back property and so on and so on. Now, let's go to more serious waters.
What did Hegel answer about the contract?
Pretty boring, that Kant doesn't see the higher spiritual unity and that it's not just sexual pleasure. This is Hegel at his worst, I claim that. He plays this, all the spiritual unity stuff and so on. Okay, but then where things go really great is in what is maybe the best, the most provocative Kant. The late Kant, his last big book on, it's called Religion Within the Limits of Reason Alone, where he, as you probably know, proposes this strange category of, and you will see immediately why the oscillation is crucial, what he first calls diabolical evil. What's his problem there? His problem is that you can be, there are elementary forms of evil which are simple egotism. Like, I don't know, you have money there, I push you away, I steal the money. Why? Because I want the money for profitable reasons, or whatever. Sorry for tasteless examples, I rape you for pleasure, I humiliate you to win, or whatever. It's, you know, it's evil things you do for obvious profitable reasons. And Kant is well aware that these reasons can be, that this works even for good, and that if you do it for some, what Kant calls pathological reason. Kant doesn't mean it in the sense of clinical pathology, but in the sense of depending on contingent, immediate empirical circumstances, it disqualifies you what you do as a true ethical act. For example, I help you, but I do this, even if I'm not aware of it, in order to impress others. What really pushes me is how nice I will appear in the eyes of others, or even a step further. Even if it's only that it makes me feel well, that I will admire myself, it also disqualifies it. So then, for Kant, a true ethical act must be done, that's his famous definition, purely autonomous, only for the sake of duty. You did it because you knew you have to do it, because it's your duty. Not because of any profit, even if it's a very sublime profit of feeling well. Then Kant encounters a problem, where he asks the question, but is it possible also to imagine a radical, diabolical evil along the same lines? An evil which you do not because of any profit that you will get from it. Pleasure, power, humiliating the other, whatever, but just for the sake of it. That you are, as it were, evil out of principle. And here again he oscillates. He starts by affirming it, but then he quickly, not explicitly, but if you follow closely the text, you can see he gets the terrifying consequence, which is that if you allow for an evil act like this, radical evil, then it is undistinguishable from the good. Because Kant defines good as something that you do just for the sake of principle, not for pathological reasons. Not because it brings you esteem, pleasure, money, but just because you get to do it. Now, if you allow for this kind of radical evil, and in this sense, here are things get complicated. This is why Kant then is forced to save his notion of the good, is forced to proclaim that this kind of diabolical, radical evil is not possible, evil done just for the sake of it, but that he then quickly reinterprets radical evil not as an act which is done just for the sake of it, but as, which would be maybe, it's more complex, one of the definitions of this kind of diabolical evil. That's why, and here we are in these quarters, Milton, Paradise Lost, that famous statement by Devil, evil be thou my good. So you do evil because you treat it as the supreme good, not for any pathological profit and so on. So then Kant reinterprets radical evil as simply a radical tendency in our human nature to do evil. Just that evil is not just kind of a contingent element, some of us have it, some not. It's something that cannot be eradicated, an eternal constitutive propensity of our being, which totally, which of course makes it much more inoffensive. What's Kant's problem? This is why Lacan, then maybe you know the line, proposed that Kant with Sade. What does Kant aim at? Why is this? Because for Lacan, when he says Kant, Sade is the truth of Kant, be very careful. Lacan's point is not Kant was secretly a sadist. This is the standard reading. Know that beneath this Kantian duty is this sadistic pleasure. Haha, you have to do your duty even if it will be a catastrophe. This kind of a superego. Like the proverbial school teacher who beats the children, his pupils, and says to himself, oh, it makes me cry, but I have to do it. It's duty, it's for their own good, but really it's for your sadistic deep pleasure. This is how Kant's moral rigorism usually. No, what Lacan claims is that it's not Kant who is a sadist, it's Sade who is a Kantian. That is to say, Marquis de Sade's injunction of this unconditional pleasure is beyond the pleasure principle. It's in a way, a choice of evil for the sake of it. And as I repeated in two of my books, which is the best example of this? I cannot refrain from repeating it. Do you know Don Giovanni? Not a real version, that is more complex, but Mozart's opera. You know what happens at the end when the stone guest arrives and confronts Don Giovanni? Read it carefully, the libretto. The stone guest is not there to punish Don Giovanni. He comes there to help him. He basically tells Don Giovanni, your life is at an end. You will die now. I give you a final chance. If before dying you repent your sins, then you still can be saved. If not, you go to hell, you will burn forever. What Don Giovanni does is he said, no, 7 times. I don't repent. But look, this is pure ethical act. Because Don Giovanni knows he has nothing to gain by remaining faithful to his sinful life. He's at the end. He gains nothing. If he repents, he can be saved. If he persists in his sins, he will burn forever. And nonetheless, he insists. It's evil, as precisely evil be thou my good. It's even if you pay the highest price, I insist in my evil. And this brings us to this typical romantic figure, the Baroness, demoniac hero. This is where things get interesting with Kant. You can also see where Sade was a Kantian at another level. If you read Marquis de Sade, there is first an obvious way to see where Sade is Kantian. I mean, one of the most boring books that I've read, which is why I didn't read to the end, is that 120 Days on Sodom. No? You know how it gets more and more purely formalized. Up to number 100, there are at least some descriptions of the acts. But then, around 300, it gets more and more a purely mathematical permutation, like take a cow, a dog, 2 young ladies, and 2 boys, and they screw in this way. Then the next one, take 1 cow, 3 boys. It becomes, how to put it, it's purely intellectual, cold. It's the coldest thing you can imagine. There is no earthly passion in it. And to go on, if you read Sade carefully, you can see what's his problem. He starts as a primitive naturalist. He claims we have a nature which not only wants to create but also wants to destroy. The natural way is this circle of life. Things have to fall apart so that new things are born and so on. So you have this then anti-oppressive message. Religion is unnatural, is suppressing our true nature, so let's throw off religious chains, let's fully live our nature. But then, in a much more interesting way, Sade gets the point that in this way we just exchange one chain, one slavery for another. We are no longer slaves of God, but we still remain slaves of nature. And here then comes to Sade the idea of what he calls absolute crime. An act of violence which is so radical that it doesn't only fit the flow of nature, but that it interrupts the very flow of nature. Like it cuts this. Which is why Sade was so interesting in this radical death, where you don't just kill someone so that then out of this another person is born, whatever, but you, as it were, stop the very cycle of reproduction and so on. And what's my point here then? What Kant calls an autonomous act is precisely the same thing. It's, as Kant put it, something which cannot be accounted for in the terms of the chain of natural causalities. It's an act ex nihilo, out of nowhere. So things are much more complex here. But nonetheless, let's go a little bit further before the break, if you allow me, with Hegel. So, again, back to Antigone. She is the opposite of this modern reflexive ethics, where you don't just do your duty. The more painful part is to decide what your duty is. You know, this is a typically modern Freudian, but already in Hegel you find this suspicion that this is unimaginable for Antigone, for this naive world of antiquity. The idea that you cannot trust your substantial ethical instincts. They can cheat. You can experience something as your duty, but what if you are doing it for some secretly pathological reasons, to profit in a secret way? This universalized suspicion is typically modern attitude. Okay, let's go on with Antigone. So this is her immediate ethical nature. But Hegel tries to prove that there is already a crack in this edifice, that Antigone's universe collapses. How? His point is that this is her starting point of Antigone. These unwritten eternal laws which are simply here are telling her that a dead person should be properly buried through the ritual and so on, and that's her duty. That's what she is. She cannot help it. But once she does the forbidden act, performing the funeral rite for, how do you pronounce it? I pronounce it usually the Greek way, Polyneikos. How do you pronounce it? Polynices, whatever. Okay, I will speak to the Greek way. And confronts the consequences. The threat that she will die while still alive, you know, that she will be excommunicated, buried alive. Only then she becomes aware of the actual rule that guided her. Through the act, she discovers beneath this universality, one has to respect unwritten laws, the particular rule. That's another quote, which comes later from Antigone. What law do I appeal to claiming this? And then, this is the famous passage. If my husband died, there would be another one. And if I were to lose a child of mine, I would have another with some other man. But since my father and my mother too are hidden away in Hades' house, I never have another living brother. That was the law I used to honor. and so on. So here, after that, she says something very different. It's not just generally unwritten laws, say, she said only for the brother. And it's interesting how dramatic this point is. Do you know that there is, if you know the history of interpretations of Antigone, do you know that for a long time one of the predominant way to get rid of it, for example, Goethe claimed this must have been a later insertion. It cannot be. It's so vulgar, the idea only for my brother. And now comes a friendly stab at my friend enemy. Even Judith Butler, in her book on Antigone, goes into this. Like, it's not only brother. Everyone is embarrassed by this motive. But for Hegel, that's the whole point. Through the act, she thinks before acting that I'm doing this out of a general principle. When confronted with the true consequences of the act, she becomes aware that no, she wouldn't have done it if another of her relatives or friends would have been left unburied, that it's only for her brother. Why? Now we come to the crucial point, which will bring us to Antigone's limitation. Of course, what you will say is, it's incest. Of course, incestuous love. And then you have one maybe good argument to claim it. It's that, okay, maybe it wouldn't have been incest in another family. But fuck it, we are talking about Oedipus family, no. If it's not incest here, then where it is. But I claim, no. I claim that, and this is the genius of Jacques Lacan's interpretation of Antigone in his seminar of ethics, how he never mentions incest. I think we should apply here that wonderful rule by Lévi-Strauss, who claimed, maybe it's false, I don't know, that he discovered, Claude Lévi-Strauss, the anthropologist, a tribe which claimed that all dreams have sexual meaning, all except sexual dreams. So I claim that precisely because this is Oedipus family where incest was like practical affair of the day, you cannot persist this into it. Why the brother? Again, and the key point is Antigone was able to formulate this insight only after she accomplished her act. Only once she did it did she become aware of what she did, of what really motivated her. So again, through the act which we pass from abstract universality, respect the dead, they all deserve funeral rites, to this concrete privileged example. Why? Okay, Hegel gives them a wonderful reason why, because the link to the brother is the link to pure otherness. What kind of other is brother? Here we encounter the Hegel's reading, that here we encounter the limitation of Antigone. Brother is, for Antigone, an other deprived of all personal features. Which is why Antigone's deed, when she says it doesn't matter what my brother did, it may all be true what Creon claims. He was a traitor, wanted to destroy our city and so on, but he is my brother. So Hegel's point is that that's the limit of this naive ethics, that the respect you pay to another no longer concerns the living but the dead. To love someone for what he is, not for what he did, is ultimately to love him as a corpse. That is to say, that's for him the inherent limitation, again, of this naive love, that it works only if the other whom you unconditionally love is reduced to a dead one. Okay, here Antigone catastrophically again confronts the limitation and so on and so on. But how do we pass from this to tragedy? This is the beauty of Hegel. Hegel's point, and I think he was absolutely right, is that it's not that after the Greek tragedies there comes comedy. Either already in the Greek time, you know how it was usually done, 4 games, I think, per day, this like not double bill as in Hollywood when I was young, but quadruple bill. That it was, 3 tragedies and a comedy. Not only in this way, and also not only historically, in the sense that that later in Roman times we have comedies. For Hegel, there is a precise point, precisely as a reaction to realizing the deadlock of her love, this mortifying dimension, that a comical element occurs in Antigone herself. Let me be precise here. How? Hegel noticed something weird happening to Antigone after she pathetically assumes her fate. After she is condemned and she knows she will die, she totally changes. If you look the play attentively, you will even notice that only at that time she becomes beautiful, sublime. Before, she is like a nasty bitch. Remember her conversations with Ismene, her sister, how brutal she is towards her and so on. I mean, if there is a so-called warm human being in Antigone, it's Ismene. Antigone is a bitch. I mean, fuck you, I wouldn't like to have Antigone for my sister, if you ask me, no? Because she would celebrate me after I'm dead. What she does to cope with her predicament is that's Hegel's point. She starts to act. She loses this natural immediacy. I organically do my duty. She displays already a level of self-awareness and reflectivity about her role. Let me give you one of the quotes, where she says, I've heard about a guest of ours, daughter of Tantalus from Phrygia. She went to an excruciating death in Scipilus, right on the mountain peak. The stone there, just like clinging ivy, wore her down, and now so people say the snow and rain never leave her there as she laments. Below her weeping eyes, her neck is wet with tears. God brings me to a final rest which most resembles hers. Why is this comedy for Hegel? She is already composing poems on herself. You know what she's doing here? It's no longer immediate suffering. It's as if I'm dying and I say, imagine, I'm like a hero and so on. You know what I mean? She's immediately, as it were, mythifying herself. She's using metaphors to designate herself, displaying a self-consciously artistic ability involved in playing the role of a character. In other words, at this moment, Antigone is no longer immediately Antigone. As we put it, she starts to play Antigone. She starts to construct a role of Antigone. And this, for Hegel, this is how he defines comedy. For him, in comedy, he gives a very strange definition of comedy, which appears counterintuitive, but I think it's wonderfully correct. For Hegel, in a comedy, the gap between the actor, as real person, and the role he acts is displayed on the stage itself. What does Hegel mean by this? Not that you do not act your role, but you comment on it, but something different, something that, let me give you an example. What makes it comical, a certain situation, is that you act a certain role, but then, and it's part of your role as an actor, I'm not talking about now as acting, that you include some kind of ironic comments on what you are doing. An example. For example, do you remember those, I think this is the famous feature of those I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball series. How, when something ridiculous happens, she looks into the camera and says, that's the moment of reflexivity. But this is not the real Lucille Ball. This is the comical reflexivity, like directly addressing the public, what's happening here and so on. And the idea is that Antigone at that point becomes Lucille Ball, if you want. It's her version of saying this. So again, for Hegel, the crucial thing that happened with the passage from tragedy to comedy, is that you lose this organic immediacy. You no longer are what you are, you play yourself. You play a role of what you are. Now, let's go a step further. Hegel's point is here a wonderful one. It's quite the opposite of the usual postmodern, the bad postmodernism. The postmodern version of the so-called return of the real wisdom. You know, some people think it's somehow, how should I put it, avant-garde, radical, when you awaken people from the illusion of reality. Theater, and when you make them aware that it's only a theater piece, it's only a film, I don't know. When I was young, for example, it was fashionable to slaughter a chicken on stage. Really, the idea was this pseudo-Brechtianism, you know. Destroy the illusion, make people aware, and so on. Now here, if you allow me a brief reference to Lacanian real, this is not Lacanian real. This is exactly, I claim, the escape from the real. For Lacan, real is precisely that what you try to escape from when you escape into reality. You are afraid that the illusion would grab you too deeply, that the real of the illusion would grab you. How do I mean this? For example, where is the real in sexuality? Sorry. Back to my vulgar nature, I read somewhere that one of the medieval strategies to cure a man from lust for women was to look at the beauty. I will not show it any of you, not to be usual. Let's say this is a woman, okay? So to look at a woman who is now young, beautiful, and imagine either how she will be 40 years from now, without teeth, stinking, and so on, whatever. Or even more evil, imagine how she is within her body, you know. It's look a nice skin, but then, you know, all the shit, the intestines, and so on and so on. So the idea is confront that real, and it will cure you of desire. But that's not the Lacanian real. The Lacanian real is this is wisdom. This is wisdom. Confront reality and so on. For Lacan, the real is precisely the pure power of this surface which may drag you into it. Real is for Lacan pure appearance. It's not this idea of we have appearances and we have to penetrate the appearances into the real. Real is not what you get at once you tear away the screen of appearances. Real is the, how do you call it, spectral power of appearance as such. You know which movie portrays this nicely? I hope you saw it. Fuck it, I like it. I admit it. Jim Carrey, The Mask. Yeah. The real is not, behind the mask is just his fucking stupid face, and his face is stupid enough. The real is, and here you see why real is for Lacan death drive and compulsion to repeat. Real, you remember when he puts the mask on, he gets caught into this absolute compulsion to act like a cartoon character. This is the spectral, undead real. He becomes an entity of pure drive. He even uses once, the character he plays, a wonderful phrase where he says, it's horrible, I'm totally lost because I can do whatever I want. And and I made, if you don't believe me to me, here you can encounter it, I made a very brutal, I don't want to repeat it, it wasn't nice, experiment with my son here when he was young. Here. I showed him I approached him with a mask on. He was a little bit afraid. Then I put the mask off. So you see, hey, it's only your stupid fucking father. Then I put the mask on. He was terrified even more again. And he was right.
Is he connected with him?
No, connected to in the sense that he knew that there is more reality in the mask. That the real is not the reality behind the mask. The real is that spectral excess of the mask itself, yes?
So if we confront, for instance, the Aristotle and Bertolt Brecht's notion of theater, in Lacanian terms, the real is the Aristotle catharsis.
Oh, you got me here. Okay, there are limits to my bluffing. I'm tempted to say I don't know. I don't know enough to answer you properly because I maybe should have said this, but I am much spontaneously, I'm on the side of Brecht here. The way I would have saved Brecht would have been to claim that this reading of Brecht, this so-called extraneation. I prefer not to say alienation because for Brecht it's the opposite. No, like it's not alienation in this Marxist sense. It's just this denaturalization. No, I think it's not Brecht's deepest message. Is not be aware. Although Brecht sometimes talks about this, be aware that it's only an illusion, reality behind. No, Brecht was fully aware of this logic of the mass, which is why, for example, my favorite Brecht, of course, the most Stalinist one, is that famous the Maßnahme, the measure taken, where a couple of comrades have to sacrifice one of them. It was usually read as a justification of Stalinist purges, which is totally not true. That play precisely was never performed in Soviet Union. And you have this wonderful notion also of a forced choice. Then the colleagues tell to the young revolutionary, tell him, there is a custom now, we have to kill you. Now we will ask you, do you want? Do you accept to be killed? But whatever you say, we will kill you, or something like that, giving you a choice. But what is so crucial there, if you read the play, is that what was the mistake of the young comrade? That when he saw suffering, he tear off the mask. The mask, the central scene of the play is when he insists, but people, I'm here to help you, and so on and so on. That was the betrayal. That was the betrayal, which is why, again, and then you have all this Brecht's extreme, almost comic, revolutionary masochism, where after killing him, I love this, the chorus of these comrades sings a song where they say, oh, if I were to be the last piece of sheet of dirt, which has to be cleansed so that the room is clean at the end, and so on and so on. But again, what I'm saying is this is why also Brecht was against psychology. He was always for a form. You know, Brecht also played this game of, and this is what I like in Brecht, his as extraneation, I think, it's not so much reality. It's actors commenting on their role, but not from the standpoint of as a real person, but from much more abstract theoretical point. Like I like in Brecht this totally unrealist way where, you know, an actor comes on stage, addresses the public and says, I am a journalist who is paid by imperialists to spread reactionary propaganda. Now I will approach a worker and I will try to corrupt him, and so on and so on. This kind of a fake transparency, which again, I don't think it's reality. I mean, Brecht was deeply fascinated by the real in the mask. You know that above his table, he had the Japanese mask of some evil spirit, this kind of a distorted face, and he wrote a wonderful poem, terrifying maybe, claiming that this mask is there to remind him how difficult it is to be truly evil. That any idiot can be good, you just help people, blah, blah, blah. But, sorry. No, do you want something to say? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
You mentioned, backtracking to, you mentioned Lacan and the spectral stage of the mirror stage, which the synonym for that is the real stage.
No. That's a good point. No.
I just wanted to make one point about that, and that is that actually in physics, it's true. There are only surfaces. Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize for electrodynamics.
Yeah.
He used to bring a brick into his students, and he'd say, okay, these are the surfaces of the brick. Show me inside the brick. And then he'd smash it with a hammer, and he'd say, okay, what's inside the brick? And then he had two more surfaces. So they'd say, well, we don't know. Then they'd smash it again and say, okay, now we have 100 surfaces. And then they'd be nothing but white rubble. And they'd say, okay, now we have millions of surfaces. There's nothing but surface in this brick. There's nothing in it. So the whole idea that the surface is not real and that we have to go inside something and find it, is actually physically not true. It's just
physically, but what I would have said is two things. What I would have said is that, nonetheless, isn't it that in a way, the moment you are at the level of life, it is true? You know what I mean? Like, it's counterintuitive to say, again, it has to be tasteless. Okay, I'll be tasteless against myself. That, okay, this is surface, but then you cut in and it's another surface. It's not simply another surface. The skin is effectively a surface, in some sense. You cannot say, that when you... Which is why my ultimate dream that I like is this idea to treat skin as another dress. For example, I am still shocked. I remember when I was a young boy, I remember a wonderful cartoon, a little bit anti-feminist, where a woman, after a party, washes herself and goes to the toilet and puts with the cream and soap off first all the maquillage, lips, and then she goes on washing her face and puts off the eyes, the nose, and so on. So after finishing the washing, that kind of a... I mean, you know what? I think that here, but I go a step further. I agree that the notion of depth is purely how should I put it? There are only surfaces, but there is an irreducible depth effect. And this is what Lacan's point, if you must know it, that wonderful old story that Lacan uses again and again when Lacan tries to explain what is the difference between humans and animals. What humans, maybe it's wrong. I spoke with some biologists, maybe who study animal behavior, they were ambiguous. Some of them, okay, it doesn't matter, it's just the logic. You know that famous, sorry if I repeat myself, you must know it, example that Lacan returns to again and again about a legendary ancient myth of a competition, Zeus and Parasius, between the two painters, ancient. And they compete who will do a better painting. First one of them, I always forget which one, paints a painting of grapes. It's so realistic that when the birds see it, they hit it to eat the grapes. Then the other one invites him to his room, and the painter sees a curtain and asks him, okay, show me what is behind the curtain, what did you paint? And he said, nothing, I just painted the curtain. No? And he wins. That is to say that the true illusion is not what is behind the curtain. The true illusion is to organize the surface in such a way that it generates the...
It's a trompe-l'oeil.
Sorry?
Trompe-l'oeil.
Yeah, but in this precise sense that you... And Lacan's idea is this is femininity as masquerade. It's nothing behind the curtain. The illusion is the very illusion of depth. How should I put it? And then we can... This is how then Lacan connects this kind of cheating with the idea that animals can be cheated in a simple, direct way of you pretend that you are A, but you are in reality B. Only humans can cheat, according to Lacan, I don't know if it's true, in a reflexive way, that you cheat in such a way that you say A, because you count on the fact that the other will think that this is only a mask for B, but you cheat by telling the truth. That only humans can cheat by telling the truth. Like, let's say, another sadistic example. Sorry, I love you all, but let's say, this will be really evil. Let's say, but I will meet you. This is just my evil mind. You know what Aristotle said, my God. There are Plato. There are only two kinds of persons. Those who have evil dreams and those who do evil things in reality. No, I mean, let's say I know that you suspect me that I want to avoid you. Talking with you, your boring questions after the class, no? Let us say that I know that you know. So let us say you encounter me on the street and you ask me, where will you be in the evening? Up here or down in the lobby? Now, I tell you, I will be down in the lobby. My idea is that because you suspect me, you will come here. He was lying, no? But I will count on this and I will really stay in the lobby, no? You know that to lie in the guise of truth. Or, how should I put it? To feign, as Lacan puts it. To play. That's for Lacan the truly symbolic trick. And so, immediately. Back to this point. So for Lacan, this is how should I put it? This is the symbolic cheating as such. And sorry, you want to?
Well, there's a famous Jewish joke about the two businessmen from Minsk and some other.
Oh, that's Lacan's big example. Yes, that, where are you going to?
They always lie because they're competing with each other. I'm going to Minsk. And then finally one day the person says the truth, I'm going to Minsk. And the other says, you lie, you really are going to Minsk.
Yeah, the Freudian version is, but you know who has the best example of this? I eternally quote it, I'm sorry if I repeat myself. It is the classical one. Marx Brothers, you know, that one. This guy talks as an idiot, acts as an idiot. This shouldn't deceive you, this guy is an idiot. I mean, so in this sense, Hegel uses exactly the same metaphor, where he says that behind the veil of appearance is nothing, there is only what we put behind, or to put it in another way, for Hegel, death is the appearance of death, in the sense of, how should I put it, death is a matter of appearance, in the sense of there is nothing really behind, but you can organize appearances in such a way that the appearance will be generated, that there is something behind the appearance, how should I put it, that all there is are appearances, all there is are inconsistencies. So what does this mean? Now, just to conclude, then you get your fucking break. Yes?
I have a question concerning the real.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking the silence of the lamps, the movie.
Yeah.
So the skin is all the time is building.
Yeah, because that, yeah.
So I'm trying to see where do you think that the power of the real gets its strength? From where does the real get its own strength? Like where does the mask becomes, a frightening thing? I mean, how, because if you ask...
I see your question. It's a good question. Maybe, I don't like to bluff more than necessary. I don't think I have a proper answer now. What I would have said, what I would have said is that the point is, yes, I agree with you, and this is linked to the remark you made before, no? Lacan started with this depreciation of appearance as imaginary and so on and so on. I think it's crucial in how only in later Lacan, starting from the Seminar 11, the real is no longer this hard real, this pseudo-Nietzschean real, this idea of real is too traumatic, too painful, so we need screens, we need masks to know that the real is this spectral force of appearance as such. Now, my answer would have been, it's a very abstract one. I know it will not convince you, but all I can do now is just to give you a general direction. My answer would have been the way Lacan treats fantasy, that is to say, how does the mask relate to its location? If a mask masks some symbolic or whatever other content, it's still imaginary. If the mask is a mask of nothing, it's real. I will give you a simple example, but maybe it will work, which I often use to show this power of real as death drive and so on and so on. That's real. You remember, did you see David Lynch, Mulholland Drive? You remember that nice scene when they are in some shitty jazz or whatever club, where an actress singer is singing on stage, she collapses, the singing goes on. This is the moment of the real where, as it were, it's almost like, Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland, when the partial object, the smile survives, insists. So here, there is even a better scene that you find along the same lines. I really love it. It's maybe the best. In that underestimated masterpiece by Sergio Leone, his last film, Once Upon a Time in America. You remember at the beginning, the phone is ringing endlessly, and then you get a whole flashback, 3 minutes. Then the guy hand picks up the phone, but the ringing goes on. Now, of course, this is not a magic movie. That is to say, both in Lynch and here in Sergio Leone, you immediately afterwards get a rational explanation. In Sergio Leone, in David Lynch, of course, that it was a playback. In Sergio Leone, is simply that the scene we saw, somebody picking up the phone, was still within the hallucination, that it wasn't the real phone and so on. But what I'm saying is that this magical moment when some appearance haunts you, but appearance beneath which there is nothing. I think this is maybe the most horrible experience. The experience when appearance is deprived of its substance. This is death. Let me give you another example to make it clear. Are you just scratching or you have a question? Okay, can I just finish then? Sorry. Usually we say images are just appearances and there is a substance. Because this is how, for example, Schopenhauer interpreted the power of music. That why is music more forceful than other arts? His idea was other arts works like poetry, painting, works through representations, images, but music in its rhythm directly renders what Schopenhauer calls the will, the life force. And you can get this access in a romantic way. Did you see, for example, the effect is usually kitschy, Chaplin's masterpiece, I think, City Lights. Yeah. You remember at the end when the girl, before blind girl, recognizes him, you have this Puccini-like kitschy, triumphant music, and then you have the end, but the music goes on. It's as if you have this excess over the images of pure life force. But that would be life drive. But then the example I usually quote, maybe you know it really traumatized me when I saw it. It really worked. Some Balanchine, the ballet guy, staged some piece of Webern, Anton Webern. You know what's the problem with Webern? You have his complete works on 3 CDs, like Webern's longest piece is 10 minutes or something like that. So, of course, how did Balanchine do it? You have dancers dancing on music. Then, music stops, they continue to dance. I mean, the effect was terrifying. As if the living dead, It's as if precisely they are, before you took the appearance as representation of the will, life force, or whatever. But then, this death drive force of appearance is for me precisely when you subtract the life substance, but the appearance goes on. But let me just conclude, because then after the break we will go into another line, if you allow me. I just want now to overrun another criticism that you may have, which is that, is then my result this kind of extremely boring postmodern stupidity that, we just play roles, there are just appearances, there is no authenticity. But before I do this, sorry, you have a question, please.
Oh, I just wanted to add to the not only this sort of this mask with nothing behind it, but the appearance of maybe there being something behind it, a phallus, the sort of like last time when you mentioned the square root of -1 has something to do with real, it's also Lacan calls the phallus. So in terms of where its sort of hauntingness comes from, there's the hauntingness of the mask with nothing behind it, but even in things like the mask that it twists and kind of distorts his face, that weird distortion, that holy shit, there is something behind it, and there shouldn't be. That's also the power and the fear.
Yeah, no, I agree here. Yes, one should don't have time now to go this in detail. Just again, I want to make that point clearly. Why I think maybe you know it, but I cannot restrain repeating it. A wonderful movie example of how we can nonetheless gain authenticity, but the notion of authenticity that emerges here is not this actor studio authenticity, this is why I hate Marlon Brando and those guys, as if tear down the masks, act out your true impulses. But what if we define authenticity as a kind of a tragic full identification with the mask itself? I'm talking here, maybe you know it, about a really nice film by Roberto Rossellini. Maybe you know it, I think it's available now, but difficult to get, from 1959, General della Rovere. It's a story about, it takes place in 43 in the north, occupied Italy, about a small time crook who is physically very similar to a big resistance leader. So the Germans had that leader arrested, but he died in prison. So the Germans made a plan. They arrest this small crook and offer him a deal. The resistance, that's crucial to know, doesn't yet know that General della Rovere, the big hero, is dead. So they tell him, we will dress you like General della Rovere, and we will put you in prison. We will put you into prison to mingle with other prisoners as General della Rovere, because they will think you are the big resistance hero. They will confine you about, resistance activity. So you will tell us what you learned, then you can go to Switzerland with money or whatever. The guy accepts it, but then identifies with the role. He plays the role to the end. He is shot as General della Rovere and so on. That's, for me, a very nice example of the authenticity of the mask itself. You play to the end. I prefer much more as a model of authenticity, the full identification with the mask, than this idea of tearing down the mask. I already, as I mentioned to you, the first or the second day, I think, this idea of tearing down the mask is always the worst of ideology. This cheap wisdom of, we are not only our ideological roles, we are humans, and so on. Yes?
There's another great example from Jorge Luis Borges. In his,
which one? I will plug here, I assume.
The movie version is called Spider Stratagem by Bertolucci. And the short story is called Theme of the Traitor and Hero. And the short story is set in Ireland, in which this son comes back to town where his father is a mythical hero.
Yeah. And
then he discovers, in fact, that his father was not a hero, but he betrayed the cause, and the partisans or the insurrectionists took him as a traitor and shot him, but they organized it to look like he was acting for the cause. So the traitor becomes a hero. But he also assumes it. And in the Italian version of the movie, the young man visits the hometown where it's set in fascist Italy. You get the idea? And then he discovers that everybody is in on the play. He's the only one that doesn't know.
Oh my God. Thanks very much. Give me your name so that then I can put, how we do it. I love this absolute hypocrisy. That when I will be honest, I will put a footnote, but a small footnote at the end of the book, I owe this idea to you. You know how you can play even a nastier game? So that you say, after writing this book, I discovered that a good friend of mine had a similar idea and so on. There's all these strategies of cheating and so on. Where I was the nastiest, but it was mad at me? With John Kovjak. I took an idea from her. So in the first version, I put a footnote. You have this phrase, typical, where you say, I borrowed this idea from blah blah, but of course, it's his idea, but if there are any mistakes, misdevelopments, they are my fault. I just turned it around. I said, I took this idea from John Kovjak, but I developed it, so it's mine. But if anything is wrong, then fuck it, it's her idea. So, unfortunately, she disappointed me. She had some problems. She didn't. She wanted to be celeb. Okay, but you know what? There are. Speaking Bertolucci, I totally agree with you. I think the early Bertolucci's are his true masterpieces. This one, and then of course Primo della Rivoluzione, Before the Revolution, and so on. He was. I think his 20th century, Novecento, is so-so. After that, starting with Jill Clayburgh, La Luna, incest story, it goes down. Then movies like The Little Buddha, their stuff for Gulag, because that would be. Okay, let's do it now, and then we go on if you want a stupid break. Okay, now, we will not be able to go through the whole entire line, but I will try to give you an idea of what Hegel calls reflexivity, how this functions in contrast, what I announced already at the beginning, in contrast to what is usually referred to as this post-Hegelian anti-philosophy, this idea that we should break out of the closed circle of philosophical idealist representation into some kind of real-life foundations. My thesis will be I will take as my example a short story by Italo Calvino, which I want to give a twist to it, a kind of a Stalinist twist, making it Hegelian. It's just to give you first an idea of this reflexivity between inside and outside. The story is told, maybe it's one of these well-known volumes. A king listens. It focuses on the sense of hearing. In an anonymous kingdom, the royal palace becomes a giant ear, and the king, obsessed and paralyzed by fears of rebellion, tries to hear every fragile sound that reverberates in his palace. Footsteps of the servants, whispers, conversations, fanfare trumpets at the raising of the flag, ceremonies, sounds of the city at the outskirts of the palace, riots, rumble of the rifles, and so on and so on. The king cannot see the source of all these sounds, but is obsessed by interpreting their meaning and the destiny they are predicting. This interpretive paranoia only seems to... So again, that's how the king lives. It's kind of, sounds everywhere, my God, totally paranoid, what do they mean, and so on and so on. Is it a plot against me or whatever? Interpreting all of this. Then something happens which puts a stop to this interpretive paranoia and completely enchants the king. Through the window, the wind brings in a singing voice of a woman, a voice of pure beauty, unique, irreplaceable. For the king, it is the sound of freedom. He steps out of the palace into the open space and mingles there with the crowd. Now, again, the first thing you should bear in mind here is that this king is not the traditional monarch, but a modern totalitarian tyrant. A traditional king doesn't care about his environment. He arrogantly ignores it. He leaves the worry to prevent plots to his ministers. It is the modern leader who is obsessed by plots. To rule is to interpret is a perfect formula for Stalinism, which was the system of endless paranoia hermeneutics. So, when the king is seduced by the pure feminine voice of immediate life pleasure, this is obviously, although unfortunately not for Calvino himself, a fantasy. Precisely the fantasy of breaking out of the closed circle of representations, of rejoining the pure outside of the innocent presence of the feminine voice, which is a kind of excess of the self-mirroring prison house of representations. This voice needs no interpretation. It only gives body to the voice which enjoys, as it were, its own exercise. But this is, again, if I got it correctly, how Calvino himself proposes the story. It's another variation on this old Susan Sontag motive of against interpretation. That this vicious circle of interpretation is a kind of a closure, prison of language, of our existence, and that the art of life is to break out of this into the fresh air of immediate presence. But I think that I will simply try now to, of course, I disagree with this. I think this is a metaphysical myth. So how should we rewrite the story? If you know my evil Stalinist mind, you will already have guessed it. How should we rewrite the story to make it the way I want to have it? What is missing here is the way this innocent externality of the voice is itself already, how shall I put it, marked, inscribed into the mirror of interpretive representation. What we should do is this, I think. This is how I would have added just one paragraph to the story. When the king exits the palace, following the voice, he is immediately arrested. The feminine voice was an instrument of the plotters to lure him out of the safety of the guarded palace, and so on and so on. I would like to, precisely, this point of externality he clings to, he falls into the trap, that's the true plot. The true plot is not all the rumors and so on. The true intelligent plot is precisely to give you a way out, which brings us, if I may indulge in another ideological reflection, maybe you know this line, but I like it, nonetheless, which brings us to how we should interpret this critique of ideology, this, how should I call it, reference to the obscenity of the sounds themselves, the obscene materiality of language, voice, of symbolic texture. Maybe you know the story, but I would like to repeat it. Something happened, I come from Slovenia, which is south of Austria. In south of Austria, bordering Slovenia, there is a province called Carinthia. They had the glorious leader, Jörg Haider, the well-known proto-fascist populist. His card, which he played again and again in politics, was that, which is totally ridiculous, that we Slovenes pose a threat to Carinthia, that we want to occupy it. So, his big political motto was, Kärnten bleibt Deutsch. Carinthia will or should remain German. How did some friends of mine, not of mine, but I met them later, leftists counter-attack? Not as you would have expected with a complex interpretation. They didn't point out how he evokes, all this usual boring Marxist stuff. He evokes imaginary fears and so on. No, to cover up some contradictions, whatever. No, they did something extremely simple and efficient to render Haider disgusting. They bought space, half a page in daily newspapers, and they just printed first this well-known phrase, Carinthia must remain or will remain German, Kärnten bleibt Deutsch, and then they just supplemented it with a series of totally meaningless, obscene variation. The whole ad read like this: Kärnten bleibt Deutsch, Kärnten bleibt Bleutsch, Kärnten bleibt Bleutsch, and so on. So all of it was just kind of an effect of disgusting obscenity. This is also one of the mechanisms that we shouldn't underestimate. For example, when do you know the German, whatever you call it, industrial hard rock punk band Rammstein? I like them. I think they're very good I think they're basically doing the same. I think that when they, some people, liberals who worry, have this divided attitude towards them. They say, yes, we know that they are ironic towards, because their spectacle is a kind of an imitation of these hard totalitarian rituals, all that stuff. The usual story is, yes, we know it's ironic, undermining, but what if there are some young people who will too directly identify with this and effectively become neo-Nazi and so on and so on? But I claim this totally misreads what they are effectively doing. They are not simply repeating the Nazi strategy. They are reducing it to this kind of signifying nonsense. They are doing to the Nazi formulas, they are doing this obscene, Kärnten bleibt Bleutsch, or whatever, so that simply by suspending sense, you become aware of the materiality, signifying materiality in all its obscenity, as it were. I think it is very effective, much more maybe than direct critique of ideology. So again, I totally reject those who see this danger of, oh, if you imitate totalitarian rituals, you play with fire. It all depends on how you imitate them. They're basically, I claim, doing the same, as we already mentioned this, basically doing the same as what Chaplin is doing is his Great Dictator. Now, when the Finkelfiegler has this incomprehensible, disgusting language which is German but not German, and so on and so on. I think that and this even makes even a more general point, similar to the point I was making yesterday about the third wave experiment. I can give you another example along these lines, even more horrifying. Did you see the movie, or I don't know if it's also in the theater play musical Cabaret? Liza Minnelli, blah blah. Okay. Do you remember that allegedly deep moment when the three of them are in the countryside and stop in an inn, and then that young boy starts to sing the song a bird, blah blah, and then awake, tomorrow belongs to me, and so on. Now, if you want to test if your friends are serious intellectuals or half-intellectual idiots, observe their reaction to this. If, as the majority of my friends did it, if they say, oh, now I understand the appeal of fascism, no? They are idiots. I think the movie is deeply cheating there. It is part of what, again, I agree here with Badiou, who is also deeply suspicious of this notion, again, it's Susan Sontag, is here at least the bad girl for me, who, in her essay of Leni Riefenstahl, she tries to prove that already, that it's not only her Nazi period, but that if you go to early and late works of Leni Riefenstahl, that she was always fascinated by motives which you can designate as some kind of proto-fascist. For example, her so-called Bergfilme, mountain films from the 20s, you know, these heroic, sacrificial, struggling, top of the mountains, and so on. The masterpiece is Das Blaue Licht, the blue light from 32, I think, which attracted Hitler's attention. That's how Hitler invited her to do Triumph of the Will. And then you know that after World War II, she celebrated in her photo album some of the black tribe in Kenya, I think today's Kenya. The idea was that, again, she was fascinated by this masculine strength, beauty, and then at the end, you know what she was doing in her final years? It's incredible. When she was going deep into the sea, diving when she was 80, even 90. But the idea is that there is a continuous line. I totally oppose this. Of course, she was a disgusting opportunist and so on. But I claim that you should not confuse fascism with what we usually dismiss as proto-fascist motives. Many things are simply not in themselves fascist. That was my point yesterday. For example, it's fashionable for liberals today to say, whenever they see a mass discipline, mass parade, crowd walking in discipline, hoo-hoo, proto-fascism. Sorry, why? As we all know, I hope you know, Hitler took this from social democrats. Social democrats started to do it. Now, a liberal answer here would have been, of course, because the whole spirit of the age was already totalitarian. No, I claim it is crucial to drop, here I agree with Badiou, this idea of proto-fascism, in the sense of it's not yet fascism, but the elements are there. The elements are there, but here I buy this kind of deconstructioning notion of rather Althusserien of ideology as articulation. What makes fascism are not all these elements. Okay, some of them are more fascist. I'm not saying you can articulate anti-Semitism in a different, progressive way. I think that anti-Semitism, or at least anti-Semitic logic, is an absolute sign, in the sense of You cannot play the game on, we can have a progressive movement and just to make things move at the beginning, use a little bit to mobilize people of anti-Semitism. I think that anti-Semitism is an absolute symptomal sign that something is wrong if it's a left anti-Semitism with the leftist project itself, as it is here, for example, in the Soviet Union. We precisely can locate the moment when the Soviet ideology took this latent anti-Semitic turn. It was precisely with the full ascension of power to Stalin where, as you probably know, the whole ideological legitimacy changed. All of a sudden, family was reasserted as the central, divorce, abortion were impossible. So again, back to Leni Riefenstahl, you see, one shouldn't concede to the enemy too much, in the sense of, I'm tempted to say almost 80%, 90% of Nazi values, we should take them over. There is nothing, I'm not crazy, I'm not saying, but there is nothing inherently Nazi in the notion, for example, of social solidarity. No, this can mean this and that. The problem is when you define social solidarity in racial terms as against the threat of the Jewish intruder. That's only what makes it, not in itself. The notion of discipline, sacrifice for community. I hate liberals who, the moment you mention sacrifice, struggle, proto-fascism. No, why? Sorry, why? And again, we should go here to the end. I don't think there is anything already proto-fascist in Leni Riefenstahl's those mountain movies. And maybe I mentioned this to you, sorry if I repeat myself. I know that I mentioned this in some group, but not here, I think. There is even a material proof, an element which puts down. Her most famous mountain film, Das Blaue Licht, the blue light, about a small city in mountains and then a mysterious girl living up there who is the outcast. I know some of my Jewish friends even try to read this movie as a kind of a portrait of anti-Semitism, because the girl then, the citizen, the inhabitants of the village try to lynch her and so on. But more important, a simple data. You know who was the main author of the scenario for this movie? The great cinema theorist Bela Balash, who was a Jew and a communist, and was at that time, 31, the lover of Leni Riefenstahl. So, you know, what matters is this, first of all, contingency of history. You should always remember ideology, how should I put it? Here I agree with my now enemy, once we were friends, Ernesto Laclau, who emphasized in a very nice deconstructionist way this logic of ideology as articulation, in the sense that ideological space is a space of, as it were, free-floating motives, elements. And then each element has a differential value in the sense that it can be enchanged with other elements. That no element, almost exceptions, anti-Semitism, but even here, Ernesto is too crazy, he doesn't agree with me. He believes in progressive anti-Semitism and so on. For example, you can give very simple examples. Let's take ecology. Ecology is in itself neutral. Neutral in the sense that you can have a socialist ecology, claiming the root of it is capitalist exploitation, only a centralized state control can blah blah. You can have a conservative ecology, claiming things went bad with industrial revolution, before we should return to whatever. You can have, I don't know, anti-centralist anarchist ecology. You know, this idea, let's return to small self-sustaining communities and so on. You can even have an entrainment, for example, of ecology with feminism, claiming that the brutal exploitation of nature was always somehow linked to the subordinate role of women. You can have capitalist ecology, it has its reason, claiming that, and there is an element of truth in it, that if you look at historical record, if anything, the so-called socialist states, their record about ecology is much worse. the true ecological catastrophes are in Soviet Union, probably in China, and so on. And you can also say that, at least I have nothing against this, up to a certain point, market does work. I just think it doesn't work all the way. You know, this idea of including ecological market as the so-called, I think the economic term is externality into the price, and so on and so on. So what I'm saying, you see the idea, is that this is how ideological space works. Every element is potentially free-floating. It doesn't have a full identity. It's a kind of open for all others, or even feminism. You can have a anti-capitalist feminism claiming, you know, feminism is, you can have this, that kind of, I mean, all elements you take can be enchained in these different ways. So, the idea is then that to analyze an ideology, it's not enough to reduce it to elements and to say, we have these elements, discipline, sacrifice, and so on, proto-fascism. No, there is no proto-fascism. Fascism is or it's not. Fascism is a certain articulation, which means fascism is the structural principle of the chain itself, as it were. When you enchain the whole series in a certain way, for which you need, you remember, as I said about anti-Semitism, a master signal. Sorry, yes?
Please finish.
No. I prefer to be interrupted now, because I ran out of steam, so...
Okay,
Sorry, you know why I'm saying, because this is a nice example of that, what we were talking before, of having... If you interrupt me now, I will be able to evoke the false appearance that I still have so many things to say, but just to interrupt. But there is nothing. So, to save myself, I need you to brutally interrupt my creative thought. Yes.
Okay. It seems the way you appear that they are really free-floating, and it's all in the structure of how we present, like you said, the articulation of every element in the chain. But I think that Rosa Luxemburg hit exactly on spot
when she
said that the thin line between socialism and barbarism, it is what the theory does with the central antagonism, whether it exposes it or whether it displays it.
I totally agree with you, and that was my big fight with Ernesto. Ernesto thinks that it's part of what he calls Marxist fundamentalism, essentialism, to even talk about the central antagonism. He wants this absolute open plurality. He claims we have a multitude of struggles. For example, anti-capitalist struggle, only one of the struggles. We have racist struggle, feminist struggle, up and down. And he claims that we can build all possible chains of equivalence among them, but that there is absolutely no priority for him. The priority of any of the struggles is a substantialist essentialism. I claim here he regresses from his own previous work. If you ask me, I think maybe his crucial best book is Before Hegemony and Social Strategy. Remember his book on, I think it's Politics and Ideology in Marxist Theory. It's an early book. It was published by Verso Books in English. He doesn't want to reprint it because there, in a very nice way, he interprets precisely along the lines that you suggested now, class struggle, not as a direct content, but precisely as a formal principle of articulation of elements. That, you know, class, and this can be done in a triumphant way, in what sense? That in a very Hegelian way, you should distinguish two levels of class struggle. Class struggle as the formal principle, and class struggle as one of the elements, where they can be in contradiction. For example, Fred Jensen drew my attention to this. Take the United States politics. How often, not class struggle, let's say class antagonism, is overdetermined in a totally inverted way. For example, that was Fred Jensen, nice example. Do you know that legendary TV debate between Richard Nixon and John Kennedy?
Yeah.
John Kennedy's whole point was there, I'm the upper class guy, Nixon acted as lower class guy, and so on and so on. And then then even, unfortunately, I claim, often it happens with US feminism, official, that sometimes, not always, I'm well aware of attempts to organize the Spanish working illegal immigrants living in LA area, blah, blah, blah. All I'm saying is that often, especially when it's connected with this primitive anti-Islamic American politics, often, what lurks in the background is this idea: we upper middle class women are truly liberated, while it's the rednecks, the stupid working class who are the true fundamentalists, and so on and so on. So, what I'm saying is that you can have a class struggle, a class position of the, let's say, bad guys, whatever you call it, which uses many working class elements. This is the whole point of populism, which is why there I'm so sad we don't have time to debate this, because we went maybe too much on this Hegelian shit. This is where I had this ferocious debate with Ernesto Laclau. He thinks populism is also neutral, not only neutral, but even more on the good side, as it were. I claim that populism is irreducibly, in its very notion, as you put it nicely, the blurring of the radical antagonism. Populism always, to refer to, Ernesto likes to use this nice Lacanian variation of the woman doesn't exist, society doesn't exist. For populism, society does exist. That's the basic premise of populism. The way populists deal, which is why populism can easily be anti-Semitic. For example, of course, the problem here is political one, no? Ernesto's horizon is he is the old leftist Peronist there, no? And he likes Peron. Unfortunately, I claim maybe Peron had some good elements, but basically he was a catastrophe for Argentina. Peron, the basic mechanism of populism is always cut off the corrupted excess, and let's get all together. On the top of it, I claim, populism has always an element of, as they put it in France, je n'en veux rien savoir. I don't want to know anything about it. There is always an element of this willful, like, don't bullshit me with complexity, tell me simply who the elements are, and so on and so on. And let me tell you a transcendental experience of mine, metaphysical, in the sense of, like, a simple thing. Maybe you know the story, it's wonderful. When this crisis, no, later even, I think, did I already mention this, where I was sitting, sorry, now I'm really afraid that I'm repeating myself even with regard to what I'm doing here. Did I already told you the story of how, when there were those tea parties in the United States, tea parties, Republicans protesting Obama taxes, how I was sitting behind a TV, did I? No, okay. No, it's a wonderful story. I will tell you what shocked me. And this brings us back to the principal articulation. I was jumping between the two TV programs, tired as a dog in a hotel. The one, of course, sorry to tell you, let's make a test. If some of you are from the United States, which TV channel do you watch for news? Fox. But they are the only amusing ones. I hate those bloodless liberals. It's passion there. I know they're disgusting. I'm not crazy, but okay. As usual, I was watching Fox News, no? But then on PBS, I noticed a nice documentary on, who is Pete Seeger, the great leftist folk icon. Okay. And then something shocked. On Fox News, there was a live transmission of one of these Republican meetings against Obama. No, all this, Obama, big bad taxi state, and so on. And there was a kind of a fake folk singer singing an anti-Obama song. And then I was jumping between this and Pete Seeger's song. What extraordinarily shocked me is the resemblance. There was a Pete Seeger song saying, we ordinary people screwed by the big business and blah, blah, blah. And I love Pete Seeger. Then I jump, this guy says, Washington bureaucracy taking our taxes, we poor working people of Texas will pay the price, and so on and so on. How? This is what I'm aiming at. How? And this is a very sad tendency in the United States. How this fundamental populist anti-central power motive is almost totally today reappropriated and changed into the rightist change. So again, I totally agree with you here. I think I don't. First, the second thing that I say is, if you read his book, but it's an interesting book, although it has a violent attack on me, his book, The Populist Reason, it has very nice moments, but I think simply that his purely formal notion of populism is too abstract. In what sense? He is forced to proclaim communism for populists, people like Mao Zedong, Yugoslav President Tito, and so on, which I think is madness. In no reasonable sense of politics are they populists. I think that, again, populism is precisely a way to appeal to all these reference, ordinary, hardworking people, blah, blah, but denying the fundamental antagonism. And again, the problem of Ernesto is that he thinks that this is essentialism and so on and so on. My problem with him is another one, that if you look at his own work, he denies it, but don't he get something more ambiguous? I think that it's not even true that in his own work, all different struggles are really just floating in the same way. His, and especially with Chantal Mouffe, who is also has some interesting reflections here, they obviously privilege the so-called democratic revolution. And for them, if you look it closely, or they even put it directly like this in that hegemony, a socialist strategy book, that all other struggles are basically for them the extension of democratic struggle. As they put it, feminist struggle emerged when people said, okay, if equality, why not also democracy for women? Then socialism, when people said, if political equality, why not also economic justice, and so on and so on. So again, I agree with you if your point is that, and then I have another problem which is even more fundamental here with Ernesto. It's that, I developed this in that triple orgy book where it was very paradoxical experience, that hegemony, contingency, whatever, the book of debates between me, Judith Butler, and Ernesto. The paradox was that at the end, I stopped being friendly. He turned against me personally, Ernesto. With Judith, it went okay. But already while we were writing it, Ernesto got violent. First, it was a conflict with Judith, because he was so brutal and patronizing in replying to her, this type of style, and she was fully justified in being furious. She asked him to tone it down. For example, I know she started a paragraph with, our beloved Judy is here, shooting with her standard guns, and so on, this kind of a patronizing attitude. But, so then he moved to me and things turned violent, precisely concerning this class struggle and so on. I think that the problem of historicity is not solved there, in the sense of, I make this point, but I think it's also a weak point of Judith, and typically I never got an answer from them. My problem is, and this brings us back to Hegel, to historicity. Why historicism is not true historicity? Do you know, I hope you do, Judith Butler's gender trouble? Okay, you know the line. Did you notice how the book has, as it were, two axes? On the one hand, it has a theory of how we are constituted as sexual entities. All this theory of it's not natural, essentialist, it's performatively enacted, contingent, all that stuff. On the other hand, she tells, in the structure of the book, a very linear narrative. It starts with stupid zero-level essentialism, when people at some mythic zero point thought that our sexual identities are purely natural. And then, Freud already makes one step, not radical enough. Lacan goes a little bit further, not radical enough. And to be slightly cynical, at the end we learn her lesson, how things really are. With Ernesto, still the best book with him and Chantal co-written, is the same. You have this idea of this pure fluidity, contingency of social identity, and then he also supplements this with a linear narrative. It starts with pure essentialism, and then, you have the first breaks, Trotsky, Bolsheviks, this idea of uneven development, Gramsci, struggle for hegemony, but the idea is they still don't go far enough. They remain still essentialist. They think they can still combine contingency with class struggle, Mao, but then finally Ernesto comes and says, no, contingency is radical. There is no, all there is this totally contingent, discursive game, struggle for hegemony is totally open, contingent, and so on and so on. My answer to which I didn't get the question, if you don't believe me, read the book, because I formulate this question, I think, if not in the first already text of mine, in the second is, which is precisely the relationship between these two aspects. That is to say, their basic theory, all social identities are discursively constructed in an open, contingent process of symbolic articulation, and the linear narrative they are telling. In other words, is there positive theory of radically contingent social construction of discursive construction of our social identities, is this just something which holds for our historical moment? Or is it that it was like this from the very beginning? To put it in slightly cynical terms, that already the early Neanderthals were fighting ideological struggles for hegemony and constructing their identity, and that it's only today that we see it. If this is true, then why do we see it only today? Why is it that Marx or others, why is it that in the 19th century they were stupid essentialists and now we see it? That is to say, what is their theory? Is it a universal theory, or is it a theory of a certain precise historical moment, which can be defined as a moment of post-modernity, in the sense of when socialism as an alternative collapsed? As we all know, all that remained was this multiplicity of single issues, and then the most you can dream about is a kind of a rainbow coalition, not in the specific sense of Jesse Jackson, but like a contingent chain of equivalences between multiplicity of struggles, which, as Ernesto always emphasizes, should not be supported by any essential reference to some central struggle, but it's totally open, contingent. For example, for Ernesto, there is nothing which naturally links ecological struggle with socialist struggle. There is nothing in the nature of ecology which privileges the link with socialism. It's totally open, contingent struggle. So, again, my problem is, what is the status of their own theory, global theory, contingent construction, and so on? Is it historical or all the time? The worst solution would have been a primitive pseudo-Hegelian one, that it's true all the time, but it's only today, in our historical moment, that we can see it. Because we live in an era where our identities are directly experienced as contingent, and so on, and so on. So what I'm saying is that there is a kind of a meta-history which is missing there. They don't provide a proper account for the historical status of their own theory. And my further point is that this is why they are, for me, ultimately simply providing the ideology of a certain very limited moment of the leftist struggle in the time of relative hegemony of the capitalist system, where nobody even thinks about global change. All you can imagine are these marginal resistances, strategic alliances, and so on. But you wanted to counterattack, or to say something.
Yeah, but it's not random that the accusation all three of you throw in the book is that the other is closet Kantian.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but again, the whole point is, this is an interesting, because, the sympathies are interesting here, because, how should I put it, as Ernesto put it nicely, me and Ernesto are for Lacan, for the Lacanian real, against Judith, who thinks Lacanian real is another form of essentialism, whatever. No? I always think that basically she understands real in this simple sense of, something that really is independently of symbolic contingency, whatever. On the other hand, me and Judith are Hegelians. I mean, much more sympathetic to Hegel, and Ernesto is, for Ernesto, he has this very boring textbook idea of Hegel as an absolute idealist where everything follows in a conceptual necessity and so on and so on. So, but again, so you see, my reproach to them, my basic reproach doesn't concern the truth or not, but the social status. I mean, the historical impact of their own theory. My reproach to Judith is that what she is describing is not some historical alternative, but simply a purified, clean form of what already is today the ruling ideology. Which is why I claim she had all the time to construct some patriarchal scare, which is no longer operative today. I simply don't think that today our predominant, hegemonic, ideological identity, ideological address is the call for some kind of patriarchal identity, and then we need to subvert it and so on. I think on the contrary that today's, what she is saying is simply, I don't see a subversive edge in it. I claim that if you say to someone, listen, your sexuality is not your natural essence. You are free to reconstruct it, to screw boys, girls, to do it with age, sorry for the bad taste remarks, to reinvent yourself again and again. There is no fixed... I mean, a yuppie would tell you, yes, thanks, that's what I'm doing. I mean, you see what I mean? I don't see the subversive edge there. Okay, sorry, we didn't go further. Tomorrow I promised you the last reflections on Hegel and so on.